Right. Good morning, everybody. We'll start with apologies, and there are a few. I'll pass to Mandy for that.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillors Pert, Clements, Parry and Oates.
Any other apologies members know of? No? Okay, we'll go on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest to record? Take it that's no. The minutes of the meeting we last held, which was on the 10th of May, they're in the pack. Any comments on the minutes for accuracy? Thank you. I'll sign those as a true record. Thank you. So that brings us on to item 4, which is the Boundary Commission verbal report. Various of you will have been to the briefing session that was held a few weeks ago. It was on Teams, but I know there's a good turnout for that. What I've got as a verbal report is just a précis of what was covered in that verbal report. And that's really to say there are 3 stages of the whole process, and this all culminates in the potential revised boundaries for 2025. So it is a long process. We're actually at the preliminary stage, and the preliminary stage is really to introduce Yemi, who was on that call. She's going to be the contact point for our process. So our reviewing officer is Yemi Fagan. So if anybody's got any concerns, there's details on that pack. If you didn't attend the meeting, there is a document that came out with the report, and you can go on and see who the contact points. There's a review manager of Alison Everson. But what it does cover, I think, quite succinctly, is the principles behind stages 2 and stage 3. So the preliminary stage is really an introduction to explain what's required. And from our point of view, what it does say is that the sooner you engage with the process and bring out any issues, the better. Because I've had experience of boundary reviews before, and the later you tend to leave things, the worse it gets, because you get knee-jerk reactions to last-minute alterations, which don't always necessarily work, in my experience. So the sooner we engage with things, the better. So the first stage is the stage we're at now, where you can have your say. And what I've discussed with Chris and the other officers, that corporate review can dip in and dip out of that process. If we see there's any need to look at the review as it's going, we can bring it back onto the agenda. So feel free to look at that from a corporate review point of view in terms of the overall governance side. We're obviously not going to be going down to the minutiae of discussing individual roads and individual settlements and where they should go. That's part of the process which really starts in phase 3. Okay, but feel free to contribute as you want to as we go through the process. And if you want things onto the agenda, then let me know or let one of the officers know. The second phase is very much looking at the total number of councillors. And although that's down to the council to discuss itself and agree for itself, there is a sort of band of acceptability, if you like. And what the Boundaries Commission will do is look at the existing setup and see if the numbers of councillors that you have fits the banding. So there's an appendix within that report that I referred to, where it looks at 62. That's the black bar on that chart. And then they look at the sort of range of comparable authorities, not necessarily your neighbouring authorities, so it's not looking up Warwickshire, Shropshire, Derbyshire, etc. It's looking at comparable nature of authorities and saying where's the sort of acceptable minimum, which in this chart is 43, and where's the acceptable maximum, in this chart it's 67, so 62 is on par. So that'll be phase 2, stage 2, when we look at the nature of the number, whether it works for us and is comparable. And then we get on to phase 3, which is really getting down to the the more detailed things of looking at the boundaries themselves. And there are some principles that they cover, and you'll see there's some frequently asked questions. So what they want to do is have things supported by evidence. You know, it's very well intentioned to say, well, I don't like it, and not give a reason. What they want is have some evidence. So if you're going to give a justification, it'll be needing some evidence to support that. And in phase 3, they'll be looking at the political groups to have their views about what they see as being right. So there won't be a role for corporate review at that stage to, as I say, look at the actual boundaries themselves. We can look at the governance aspects, but when they start looking at the boundaries, they'll be talking to communities, they'll be talking to political groups. And at that stage, they don't then intend to go backwards and reinvent the council numbers, apart from occasionally, and as I said, these things do happen. They found out previously that they've got an agreed number. Then when they start talking to communities, they realise that they can't quite do what they wanted to do. And one of the solutions is to either increase or decrease by one member, because it can work that way as a solution. What they do not do is look at things like constituency boundaries. There are certain things they want to do. They want to not split parishes, and they want to work on, long word, coterminosity with the district and boroughs. And I particularly have that issue where my colleagues in Lichfield District don't have coterminous boundaries between district and county. So the residents are totally confused because they've got one councillor for district and one for a county, and they can't work out who to contact. Never very helpful. I'll let you come in a minute, John. So that's the sort of thing that they're looking for, early warnings of any issues on. Okay, I'll pause on that and let John Francis in.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just briefly, I mean, I had a look at some of this stuff, and it's an absolute nightmare. I mean, we end up going with my division down into Great Worley, which is West Mids. I mean, it's an absolute blinking joke. And this is the precursor, as far as I'm concerned, looking at what's going on with the boundaries for the MPs as well. This is a precursor to getting rid of districts and boroughs, as far as I'm concerned, because there's a lot more going on behind the scenes with this than people realise. and as far as I'm concerned, one of the other aspects of it is to reduce the amount of councillors. And whether that's in district boroughs as it is now, or county council, I don't care. There's a lot more to this than meets the eye, and we know why.
Councillor Francis, I don't think I can agree with either of those points. I made the statement earlier that you start with the number that you think is right for councillors. There's no ulterior motive in terms of trying to reduce the numbers. So if 62 is the right number, then the county can present that as being its view. And as I say, you know, only occasionally does the number get challenged because it's too many or too few compared to comparators. And the other thing is that it'll be down to the individual communities to decide where those boundaries should be. There's no other ulterior motive to try and reduce numbers of councillors through manufacture. I think it's fair to say that the boundaries commissions are hopefully working with those communities to there's something throughout the document about consent. They're not looking for disagreements and all sorts of barriers. They're looking for consent with communities. I'll bring John Treadwell in first.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just reiterate on that point, I think I've been in something like 4 separate meetings with the Commission so far, and in each of those meetings they've been really clear. They have no agenda in terms of council numbers. That's entirely for us to sort of come to them with what we think would be best for Staffordshire in terms of that efficient and effective local government. And I think if we can make a good case for 62, I'd be surprised if the number at the end of it was that far apart from 62. I think members, that should be at the lower end of our worries. And again, I think they've been really clear There are some specific statutory criteria that they work to, and that's all that they consider. And I think that one of the key ones when it does come to looking at those, the boundaries themselves and the nature of the divisions, it is about that local identity. And I think that's something that we can really help them with as an authority. You have all that information about local identity. I think they've made it really clear. They want to hear from you to understand that when they're drawing up their division boundaries. So again, I don't think there's any agenda here. It is about just a review to make sure that the boundaries, the numbers are right. The only other thing I would add is we have to make, as the Chair's explained, it's in 2 stages really. The first stage is to sort out how many seats, how many divisions are going to be in the county. That submission, I think, has to be in by the 21st of October or thereabouts. So we'll go to full council on the 13th of October to make sure the council's submission in respect of numbers is signed off. But the other thing that we have to do on the same timescale, if we want to have one of those a one-member division review, we have to stay at that point as well. So I think there are 2 divisions currently which have 2 members, so that's something we'd have to consider at the same time as well. Do we want to have a one-member review? Otherwise, if we don't, there's a possibility you can end up with some mixture of 1, 2 and 3 member divisions, which I guess would not be what we wanted. But that's the first stage, 21st of October. And I think it's only after that we start to get into that issue of the boundaries. I think we need to focus on that first bit first, really.
Thanks, John. Councillor Worthington.
Yeah, I listen to what John says, but I do feel it's a bit of an hidden agenda, because certainly from District Council, I know some of the seats, and mine's a 3-seat ward, and I'm sure the ultimate idea is to make these wards 1 seat. So I think there is some way of reducing councillors, so I hope it doesn't extend to county council, but I just think I do think there's a hidden agenda there. I hope John's right that there isn't, but I've got grave doubts about that.
Okay. Yeah. Councillor Spencer.
Chair, thank you. I suppose one of the things that you pointed out was that I think you said that they talk to local communities and residents and groups. One of the issues that I certainly find in my area is there's still that confusion around district and borough and the various tiers and where some of those boundaries already lie. And also following the district version of this, one of the lessons that was learned was that there was very little engagement with local people and local communities. Sometimes an air of not really wanting to be bothered or not really interested. Are there any plans yet as to how the Commission intend to carry out that consultation process? And will we be party to any of those plans, or will we be able to see them in some detail? I know it talks in the report about the fact that that's what they intend to do, but often it's the detail of how that's going to be carried out that I think is important.
I'll bring in Chris Eberly on that. There is a table in Appendix 3 in this document.
So the consultation side of it is very much led by the Commission. From my previous experience, it's, as with most consultations nowadays, it's largely done online. But obviously there still are other avenues and mediums for people to respond. But as the Chair has already said and has been echoed several times, it's very much about getting the views of local communities and wanting that sort of feedback. I think that's answered the question, hopefully.
Just to echo that, the timetable that I've just looked at, looking at divisional patterns, consultation on warding patterns, they talk to the council, they talk to political groups and the general public, and the consultation, collation and analysis all takes place between the 10th of January and the 20th of March. So there's 2.5 months to go through that process.
We didn't take much notice of the last one when we put views forward, did we? Let's put it that way.
I can't comment, I wasn't there. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Chair. just building on what Councillor Spencer said, in East Staffordshire and in and around Burton, very, very diverse community. You've heard me say that many times before. And I'm just rather anxious in terms of the communications and delivery of this strategy to those where English isn't their first language. I haven't opened the subject in my division yet with people from ethnic backgrounds, but I do hope, I'd like to get something into the system about that, and what weight is being given to groups that may not engage but will have no awareness of what's going on. Because no matter how much we talk as local politicians, we can talk and talk and talk, but who's listening when it sounds as if it's complicated to some people? I'd welcome a steer on that, Chair, if you have anything, or could we expect any clarity around that?
I think that's a good observation that we should make as part of our governance process. You're quite right. There are some areas where the communities themselves won't fully engage because they've got that ethnicity mix. And the other thing that I think I'm particularly concerned about, and I've got an issue with this, is one of the things within my district, and that's the elderly who don't engage with things that are online and involve dialogue via websites and email addresses, etc., where they can feel quite ostracised from the whole process because they're not so strongly involved. John Tradewell.
Both really good points. It would be helpful then if it could be minuted from this committee that those are two areas of concern that you have, and you want us to pick that up with the Commission. We will certainly be using all our communication avenues as an authority to get the details of the consultation out to people so that it does get heard by people. But I take your point about those hard to reach groups, and we need to take that point up with the Commission to make sure they're considering that and thinking through how they make sure those groups do have access to this consultation.
Mr. Spencer?
Sorry, I was just going to make the point I've just found it on here. I mean, Codsall, where I represent, isn't an area that has diverse communities. And at the last online consultation around district boundaries, they received just 6 replies. And I think if we're going to get a meaningful feedback from groups and communities, we need to look at other methods other than just online.
Yeah, I think the suggestion I would make is that the Boundaries Commission should use whatever other methods they have to contact the parishes. And I know working with parish councils, the notice board is still important. We might think that everything's switched over to websites and social media sites, but the good old-fashioned notice board is quite significant as well for parishes. Councillor Francis?
That's the problem, isn't it? Communication. We have the same thing here at county, and we have the same thing in districts and boroughs, communicating with our constituents. And I can tell you now, mine's a big rural division with outlying farms and a lot of elderly people. You try and get to those and explain what's going on. You try and ask them to get on the websites and have a look. They don't want to know. They ain't got a clue and they're not interested, Colin. And it all comes down to the fact that if it's a two-way street, it's going one way, but it ain't coming back because you can't get the people to... And we've disenfranchised hundreds of thousands of people in this county with going down the electronic way, I'll tell you that for nothing. And I get complaints all the time about it, and it's just not good enough.
Okay, well, we've minuted the fact that the Boundaries Commission need to give consideration to the ethnic groups and the elderly who might not engage with electronic means. Is there anything else that we want to raise at this stage? No? Okay, thanks for that discussion. We'll go on to item 5, which is the work programme, which has been circulated. And as before, it's been updated in terms of what is coming down the line in the next few meetings. You'll see that we've got today's agenda. We've got the integrated performance report for the 2nd of August, and then we go into things like Entrust and looking at the overview and scrutiny process in September. We've had, Chairman and Vice Chairman, we've had a coordination meeting with the leader in terms of a triangulation, and some of the ideas that have come out of that are now in the work programme. We've got a need to revisit the equalities update, looking at recruitment and retention, and some of the things that we need to get more information about. The leader has asked us to look at civil contingencies. You'll see that's on the last page. Really just look at what we're currently doing and whether it's right for purpose, given that we've had a couple of major things, including a pandemic, to deal with. And also the Leaders Board for Staffordshire, which is fairly new in its development, but there's a request that we look at that in terms of process and whether the governance is correct. Obviously, we'll be looking at the Mtfs process as well, which is on the agenda later on this today. Is there anything anybody wants to add or comment on the work programme? No? Okay, well, thanks to the officers for getting us to that stage. We'll obviously review it at future meetings as well. We'll go to item 6, which is the appointment of members to the Mtfs, Medium-Term Financial Strategy. And again, you'll see circulated, we've got an existing line-up for the Mtfs group. For 21-22, that membership was myself as chairman, Councillor Peters, Councillor Atkins, Councillor Pert, Councillor Heath, Councillor Thompson and Councillor Oates. Those people who are absent today, which is Councillor Pert and Oates, have indicated that they would want to continue in those roles. So we have a membership of 7. I think anything between 6 and 8 is satisfactory. Gives us a bit of fluidity, different interests, and we tend to have a good cross-section of people, old and new, on the council as well. Anybody else want to comment? Councillor Peters.
Chair, I'm not wishing for a sympathy vote here, but I may have to have an operation on my knee as we approach the end of the year. I won't know for a couple of weeks, so I can't guarantee I'm going to be here unless you do something on Teams. But it won't put me out for long, but it will just restrict me for possibly a week or so.
I'd certainly like to continue.
Okay, thank you. Just in relation to Councillor Peters' comments, and thanks for your agreement to continue. I think the whole process of Mtfs is not like a soap opera where you need to know the start to get to the end of it. I think it's more episodal that you can dip in and dip out as available. So I'd consider that you should maybe make it available for those that you can make, and we'll see where we go from there. But hope the operation goes well. But we've got dates itemised throughout there so that people can plan ahead. I think that's one of the other things that... sorry, I haven't got dates planned, have we? No, we didn't plan ahead. We've got last year's dates, but we will do the best we can to try and get dates organised once we've agreed the committee. Because certainly I find it very useful to have got them in the diary for the whole section rather than one at a time. Okay, so Councillor Atkins is prepared to continue, Councillor Peters and myself. As I say, Councillors Pert and Oates have indicated. My 2 vice chairmen, are you happy to continue?
Yes, please. Unless there's someone else who desperately wants to take my place.
No great rush? No? No, I think we have the magic 7, so we'll continue with that. Okay, and as I say, we now need to get dates in diaries, and the inaugural meeting will look at how we deal with the process of getting some areas to look at. So any thoughts you have on that, then obviously let me or one of the vice chairmen know. We'll go through that process. We'll move on to item 7 then, which is the Climate Change Working Group, and Deb is here for this meeting. Deb has put a report together which looks at the last meeting that was held on the 21st of June, and sorry, that encapsulates the previous meetings that have taken place up until today. So you can see there that there's a process that's followed through. Do you want to make a comment, Deb, in terms of where we are with it?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, will do. So the meeting, the group has met on 3 occasions so far, November, January and March, and was due to meet again in early June following the annual council and appointment of members to this committee. Unfortunately, the former chair of the Climate Change Working Group was not reappointed to corporate. Therefore, I am awaiting nominations for the chairmanship of that working group to continue and plan in the next meeting. The next meeting of the group will be looking at best practice elsewhere. We have invited the LGA to come and give a presentation on support to local authorities on climate change planning. We've also invited 2 county councils to come and give evidence of best practice. So everything is in the pipeline, Chair. We're just waiting to set the date. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a few decisions that we need to make, because in the same way that this group is the parent of the Mtfs group, it's also the parent committee that looks after the Climate Change Working Group. So we need to decide who we want on that committee, and we also need to decide, with Conor Wildman no longer being a member of Corporate Review, whether we want Conor to continue and whether we'd want him or somebody else to be the chair. And it would make sense if the chair was from this group, so it's part of the parenting of Corporate Review. Councillor Francis.
There's a little bit on paragraph 14, bullet points, little A, B, C and D. What has been achieved so far? What has been done well? What are the barriers, blockages? What more can be done? Have we got a report on that? Do we know what outcomes have been achieved?
Through you, Chair. Yes, Chair, there is a findings table which summarises all of the findings of the meeting, where directors of each of the areas of the council were invited and questioned by the working group about their progress, about their achievements and their plans on climate change. That summary report will also be reported to the next meeting and will be included in the final report to corporate in September, Chair, I think it was. We'll be coming back to this committee. Thank you.
Just coming back briefly, is the timelines on this stuff, have we got specific dates and times that certain actions have got to be completed or not?
I think what Deb has referred to as the timeline, certainly for this year, so there will be a report to Corporate Review on the completion of the next meeting, but we as a Corporate Review Committee need to decide how continuous this process is. I mean, climate change will not stop just because we stop having meetings. We need to then decide what happens in future years. So I think that there needs to be a sort of a break and a sort of end of current process, and then a reappointment and restart. So I think, as Deborah said, we're 1 meeting away from having that conclusion and a report to this Corporate Review Committee. But we then need to decide if that working group carries on beyond then. So there's a few things that we as a parent group need to agree. As I say, the future of the climate change, my personal view is that we would want to carry on. My other personal view is that we would want to carry on with a chairman who's a member of Corporate Review, which makes it difficult for Conor Wildman to be the chairman of the group. I take members' interests and views about whether we should invite Conor to continue with the group, given that he's got a lot of enthusiasm for the subject. David Smith, by the same token, is not a member of Corporate Review, but was very keen on being involved in it, and he made approaches to the leader to ask although he wasn't on corporate review, could he participate in the climate change working group? I haven't spoken to Connor, but I'd take views on whether we should ask him to continue, whether he wants to continue. And I have discussed it with Councillor Thompson, who's taken over as Vice Chairman in Connor's absence, whether she would be agreeable to being part of the climate change working group so that we've got that other representation. Councillor Worthington.
Yeah, I believe Connor was quite busy. I think that was the problem with Connor. I think with being working, I think it was hard for him to carry out that role. But don't you think we should be asking Alan White who would be his preferred candidate to be on that chair of climate change as leader of the council?
If I may, in response to that through you, Chair. So ultimately, it's the decision of this committee to appoint members to that working group. And as you know, scrutiny shouldn't be political, and I'm not suggesting that's what you're saying there, Councillor Worthington. But I think it's quite simple for you as a committee to appoint who sits on that working group. I think you've already got some nominations already, and people who've still been on that working group previously. And then it's to agree who the chair of that working group is going to be, in the same way as what you've done for the Mtfs working group.
Councillor Atkins?
Has anyone spoken to Connor about whether he wants to continue? I think that's probably a factor that we should consider, because certainly he has been very enthusiastic. He's chaired it well, and he's been, quite a force in terms of climate change, both in his previous role and in terms of leading this committee. So I think we ought to ask Connor what he thinks, whether in fact he would like to continue. Because, when people say, if you're trying to consider someone who's busy. Because I think he can focus, but I do think we ought to ask him before we make a decision in his absence.
Okay. If I can respond to Councillor Worthington's comments, I do think it's for this committee to decide rather than the leader. It's our, as Chris has said, it's our scrutiny role, so we can decide who we want. I haven't approached Connor because I wasn't sure what the views of this group would be. I certainly think because of his enthusiasm and his interest and his knowledge, it would be wrong to exclude him from being involved. And I'm quite happy that we make that approach and see whether he wants to continue. I do think we need to have somebody from this committee who's the chairman now, so that was the next stage. Councillor Spencer.
Chair, thank you. Have we asked for any expressions of interest from anyone else? I mean, should we, we're making an assumption that Connor still wants to do it. Are there any other enthusiastic individuals who perhaps would like to make a bid for it?
Well, I think that's really this process we're at now. Because we've got one more meeting before the finalising of this report, it's probably a sort of situation of arranging to complete what we've currently started. But that doesn't stop us appointing to a new body or a new impetus behind this working group where in the future. And we could do that now, or we could do that at a future meeting. Councillor Worthington?
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate, I mean, obviously I chair audit, and I think Connor's attended one meeting due to work commitments, but I think Councillor Atkins is quite right. We should ask him as a matter of courtesy, and if he doesn't want to do it, then obviously come back to ourselves.
Okay. I think the consensus then is that we do invite him to continue if he so wishes. And it would be for one meeting, and then, as I say, we can decide appointments beyond that. I mean, the timescale of the next meeting would be appropriate once we've spoken to him, whether he'd want to continue in a longer term fashion. Can I address the matter of the chairmanship then? I've asked Councillor Thompson if she'd be prepared to join the committee. Is that the case? So we then have the situation of the chairmanship. For one meeting, I don't know whether Councillor Thompson would want to chair a meeting going straight into it.
I don't have that knowledge what the other group members have. But I'll be quite happy to do it if you'd rather me to.
Councillor Spencer?
I'd second that nomination.
Okay. All I will say is that there are some good people on that group who know what they're dealing with and have been involved in the process. I'm saying that because I'm not on the working group, so I've only been tangentially involved myself, but I do know that it's been performing well, and I'm sure we'll all look forward to the report at the next meeting. So there will be people who are knowledgeable, and I think we've had the discussion with Deb as well, that she's prepared to help in administering that meeting. Anything else we need to say on the climate change? Just to echo what I've said earlier, I think those people who were previously on climate change from this committee will want to continue. Councillor Pert has indicated that he would. Councillor Clements, I think, would continue. Councillor Atkins has said yes to that. Councillor Peters, we've discussed, would, subject to the operation, would be available. Okay, so it would be the existing lineup potentially if Councillor Wyman agrees, plus Councillor Thompson as chair for one meeting. Okay. How does that leave us in terms of going forward in the future? Can I ask maybe Deb on the timing of that?
Yes, Chair. We can now set a date with the new chair of the working group. Hopefully that will be quite quickly. We have contacts in line and ready to set the date with us. So hopefully we would get a report back to this committee in September.
So obviously by September we'll have had the final report and we'll maybe have a steer in terms of what the direction might be of the working group as well. So maybe that's the time to look at the composition of the future group. Any other comments on climate change? Well, I think that brings us to item 8, which is the exclusion of the public, and there are no items for confidential. So on that basis, I'll close the meeting.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Well, it's a very efficient meeting. It's short and sweet.